Every country's economy is built on some kind of big idea, a master plan. Today, we're going to dig into the powerful socialist blueprint that Israel's founders used to build its economy, right from scratch.
Okay, so let's just think about this for a second. Imagine you get to build a new country. A total blank slate. You've got to create an entire economy. What's your guiding philosophy? What's the big idea? Well, let's dive into the very specific answer that Israel's founders came up with.
All right, here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the big economic ideas that were floating around at the time. Then we'll zoom in on the socialist path Israel took, see what that actually looked like in the early years, and wrap up by connecting it all to where the country's economy is today.
So, first things first, Israel's economy didn't just pop up out of nowhere. No, from the moment the state was founded back in 1948, its economic path was very deliberately shaped by a really powerful guiding ideology.
And this is the key. The folks actually building the state, setting up all the institutions, they were from parties like Mapai and Mapam, the workers' parties. So for them, socialist beliefs, that wasn't just an option on the table. It was more like the default setting, the factory settings for the whole new nation's economy. To really get why they went this route, we kind of have to understand the three big economic isms that were competing on the world stage back then. You can think of them as three totally different operating systems for running a country.
Okay, so on one extreme, you've got communism. Just picture the Soviet Union. Here, the state is everything, and I mean everything. There's no private property, the government owns all the resources and is in charge of handing them out equally to everybody.
Then, on the complete opposite end of the spectrum, you have pure capitalism. In this world, the free market is king. The government's role is hands-off. It's kind of a survival of the fittest model, with absolutely no state guarantee for things like welfare, housing, or a job.
And this chart just lays it out so clearly. The huge difference really comes down to state control versus private ownership. On one side, the state owns and plans everything for the good of the group. On the other, it's all about private individuals driving the economy in a free market.
And then, wedged right in the middle, you have this third way, socialism. Think of it as a hybrid. You can still own private property, absolutely. But, and this is a big but, the state steps in a major way to make sure there's a strong social safety net. It's committed to ensuring everyone's basic needs are met.
You can see these different models playing out all over the world, right? The Soviet Union was the textbook example of communism. For socialism, you think of places like Sweden or France with their strong welfare states. And of course, the United States is the classic example of a capitalist, market-driven economy.
So, you have these three options on the table. Which way did Israel's founders go? Well, for them, it was a no-brainer.
See, for them, the main goal wasn't just about building up wealth. Their North Star, their entire vision, was to create a society based on as much equality as humanly possible. That was priority number one.
So where did this intense focus come from? Well, it was a mix of things. A big part was their own experience in the kibbutz movement. Then there was their political dominance as the workers' parties. They even drew some inspiration from Soviet social concepts, not the politics but the social ideas. At the end of the day, it all came together in this powerful desire to build a true welfare state.
And this is so important. They weren't just dreamers working from a textbook. They had a living, breathing laboratory for these socialist ideals right there, the kibbutz. It was a small-scale society where everyone pitched in, everyone worked, and everyone got what they needed. Shared food, shared housing, the whole deal. The big idea was, hey, what if we could scale this up for the whole country?
Okay, so what does it actually look like when you try to build an entire nation based on this socialist blueprint? Let's take a look at how they put these ideas to work during Israel's first couple of decades. This period, from 48 to 66, is known as the directed economy. And that name says it all, really. This was an economy that was actively steered and managed by the government, not just left to the whims of the market. So how did this work in practice? Well, this whole system basically rested on four huge pillars. First, you had central planning. The government was calling the shots on where the money went. Second, massive state intervention in, well, pretty much everything. Third, most of the big companies were actually owned by the government. And fourth, and this is a really unique one, you had Histadrut. This was a labor union, but it was so powerful it was also a major employer, itself owning banks and factories, the whole shebang.
This table just makes it so incredibly clear. The state wasn't just a referee on the sidelines, it was the star player, on the field in every position. Building and handing out housing, that was the state. Running the major industries, state again. The #1 employer in the country, you guessed it, the government was the absolute center of gravity for all economic activity.
All right, let's pull all these threads together. What's the lasting impact of this socialist foundation? How does it continue to shape Israel today?
Here's the bottom line. Those first 18 or so years weren't just some passing phase. They actually forged the country's economic DNA. This deep-rooted idea of state intervention and a strong social safety net got hardwired into the system, and it's influenced how the economy has developed ever since.
And this is where it gets really interesting, right? This brings us to a huge question for today. How does that old legacy, that DNA of a state-managed economy, affect modern challenges? I'm talking about things like Israel's famously high cost of living. Is that deep-seated belief in state intervention a help, or is it a hindrance when you're competing in a 21st century global market? That's really the tension we're left with.
All right, welcome back. Today, we're diving into what is honestly one of the most incredible economic stories of the 20th century. We're talking about how the brand new state of Israel, against pretty much all odds, managed to even build an economy in its first few years of existence. So this really is the central question, isn't it? And this isn't just some thought experiment. This was the cold, hard reality facing Israel's leaders. Just try to imagine it. Your country's population more than doubling in just a handful of years. How on earth do you feed everyone? Where do they live? What jobs do they do? I mean, it sounds completely impossible. Okay, so to understand how they even began to tackle this, you've got to look at the vision they had. See, the founders weren't just building a country, they were trying to build an entire economy from the ground up. And it was all based on a very specific set of ideals. And you can see here how it all kind of fits together. The ideology at the time was deeply socialist, and that meant the government was in the driver's seat for, well, pretty much everything. It was central planning, pure and simple. And what was their number one, top-of-the-list priority? Agriculture. They set up all these new settlements, you've probably heard of the kibbutzim, all with one single-minded goal, food security. The nation absolutely had to be able to feed itself. That was job one. But that idealistic vision was about to slam head-on into a monumental challenge. A literal human wave was heading for Israel's shores, and it was going to test this young state to its absolute breaking point. And to really wrap your head around the sheer scale of this challenge, you just have to look at the numbers. On one side, you have this tiny, brand new nation, and on the other, this absolutely unprecedented wave of immigration. The math is just staggering. So get this, in 1948, when Israel was founded, the entire population was only 600,000 people. That's it. To put that in perspective, that's smaller than a lot of cities are today. Then, boom, by 1955, just 7 years later, they had taken in nearly 1 million new immigrants. Let that sink in for a second. The population didn't just grow, it exploded. It more than doubled. And this wasn't some slow, gradual thing. This was an all-out emergency. Well, the result was completely inevitable, right? A critical shortage of, well, everything. Not enough houses, not enough jobs, and most importantly, not enough food. You just couldn't feed that many people. So what do? What does a government do when faced with a situation like that? Israel's answer was a really drastic policy. It was known as the Tzena, which translates to the austerity period. The whole idea behind Tzena was actually pretty simple. If there isn't enough to go around for everybody, then you have to control what everybody gets. It was a policy of radical rationing, and it was designed to make sure that every single family, whether they were new arrivals or had been there for a while, got an equal share, even if that share was, painfully small. And this quote right here just illustrates the logic perfectly. It's so simple and stark. You've only got 10 eggs, but 20 families. So what do? You ration. Everybody gets their share. This wasn't about getting rich or prosperity. It was about survival, and it was about fairness. The government basically decided, look, it's better for everyone to have a little than for some people to have a lot while others starve. And this wasn't some short-term fix they did for a few months. Official rationing kicked off in 1949 and didn't really fully end for almost a decade. For a whole generation of Israelis, this state of austerity, this was just normal life. It was their economic reality. So what did that actually look like day to day? Well, this policy touched literally every part of life. You got coupons for your food and other basic goods. The government controlled all the resources, and they slammed the brakes on imports. Now, part of that was to get local production going, but the biggest reason was to save every last bit of foreign currency for the most critical thing of all, national security. But here's the thing. Even with all that rationing, it just wasn't enough. The country was teetering on the brink. They desperately needed cash, real capital, to build things like roads and factories and create jobs. A lifeline had to come from somewhere else. And that lifeline ended up coming from two main places. First, you had loans from the American Jewish community. This was the Israel Bonds Program, and it was an absolutely incredible source of money for development. The second source, though, was much, much more complicated. We're talking about reparations from West Germany for the Holocaust.
Now, this decision to take money from Germany, you have to understand, this was one of the most painful, most divisive issues in Israel's early history. For so many people, especially Holocaust survivors, the idea of taking what they called blood money was just unthinkable. There were huge protests. It really threatened to tear the country apart. But the prime minister at the time, David Ben-Gurion, he took a very pragmatic, long-term view. He basically argued that this money was absolutely essential for the survival and the growth of the state, the very state that was now the home for the people who had suffered so much. It was a gut-wrenching, almost impossible choice, but he was convinced it was what they had to do to build a future. So when you look back, Israel's early years were just defined by these impossible choices, right? A constant tug of war between ideology and sheer necessity, between the past and the future. And it kind of leaves you with a question for today, doesn't it? What are the impossible decisions that are shaping Israel's economy right now?